Sixers Fix with Scott Ninnis. Join one of the Adelaide 36ers' favourite sons as we deep dive into everything past and present about one of the most storied franchises in the NBL. It's Sixers Fix, your Adelaide 36ers podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode here of Sixers Fix with Scott Ninnis. We're in the middle of the NBL off-season, but as you would have noticed, there's plenty still to talk about, so that's why we're back here for another episode. We got some good feedback in our show last week, Scott, with a really good chat with Connor Henry, the new head coach of the Adelaide 36ers, and now we've gone back to the best of the best, and we've got Brett Maher with us this week, and we're going to go for a deep dive into picking our best ever Adelaide 36ers first and second team. So who better to sit down with than Scott Ninnis and Brett Maher to have that discussion with, so it's going to be a fascinating show. But first of all, Scott, thanks for joining me again, and we've survived another week of this coronavirus.
I'll survive, mate. We've got no other choice, really, do we? So, yes, any excuse to get out of the house at the moment. So I've come round to see Brett. We thought we'd do something, it should be a bit of fun and name our first and second team all-time 36ers. No doubt we'll make some enemies and probably some friends out of some of these selections. But, looking forward to sitting down and choosing them with a great man alongside of me.
Yeah, Brett, thanks for joining us once again. Before we get into talking about our all-time teams, how are you holding up in this time? Obviously, working as a firefighter, it's probably been a bit different for you, but you've decided to break our hearts a little bit as well and go out on your own in the podcasting world with a pretty famous Adelaide Crow.
Yeah, as far as the COVID goes, it's been not smooth sailing for me, but as an essential service, we're still getting out there and fighting fires and dealing with anything that goes on that we would normally deal with. So it hasn't affected us too much other than we've kind of disbanded some of the trucks from the main centre city, and I've been going out and based at a different station, which has been quite good as a change. And, I'm still really loving that. And then, Andrew McLeod approached me a little while ago and asked if I wanted to join him. He's clearly very bored in the COVID situation. He's not been able to do any of his programs with the Crows and that, and just wanted my take on a few different things. So I've just snuck around to his house a couple of times, put together a little one.
Very good. Now, I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to Scott and I's chat with Connor Henry last week, but in terms of his appointment as the new head coach of the 36ers, are you happy with that appointment, and do you think he's the right man to take the club forward?
Yeah, I do. I actually listen to the podcast and am an avid regular listener. No, he speaks very well, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And, he says all the right things. Well, the proof will be in the pudding when he gets out here. But, I was really impressed. I didn't even have him on the radar, really, as an option. So for him to pop up and be chosen, I think there was some really good signs. And it's been a really good couple of weeks for the 36ers. I think if you look at the end of last year, how badly it was looking, for them to turn it round and sign a really good coach, and then to get DJ to sign up for 3 years, plus obviously the addition of young Josh Giddey in the off-season as well. It's looking like they're turning it around really quickly.
Absolutely. That was the other big news I wanted to ask you both about this week. Daniel Johnson, massive for him to not only commit to come back, but to actually re-sign on his contract and guarantee that he's here for the next 3 years. I think that pretty much means that he's an Adelaide 36er for life now, and I'm sure he's somebody that we'll discuss later on once we get to our all-time teams as well. I think it would have been a huge kick in the guts, and it might have been something the team couldn't have recovered from this coming season if he decided to opt out of his contract, like I guess we've seen Bryce Cotton and Nick Kay and Casper Ware do elsewhere. But how big was it for DJ to recommit to the club?
Oh, I think it's fantastic. Like you said, there's a lot of players opting out, and once again, it's a really good tick for the club to be able to get that done. It's just fantastic news. And Daniel Johnson's elite. You're talking about the guy who's been the leading scorer and rebounder for the last 10 years in the NBL. He's 6'11", unbelievable shooter. He has his detractors. Some of his perhaps defensive limitations, but to get that signature and know that he's going to be there to be able to be the cornerstone of the team for the next 3 years is I think is a massive coup, and all the people at the club should be congratulated on it. Yeah, I think for the organisation as well as a whole, they needed these good news stories to be able to sell tickets for next year and to be able to get some of these big signings. It gives the fans some confidence in the organisation and in the team, and I think it's going to really help in all of those areas.
Now, Scott, before we do head into our topic for this week, we've had some feedback on social media. A couple of people got in touch and have wanted to make a couple of comments to you and also ask you a couple of questions. One of our big supporters has been Remedial Effects Massage. Not sure if you've ever come across Jeff from that account, but he's got a couple of things he wanted to fire your way after listening to our chat with Conor Henry last week. First of all, which 3 Aussie free agents would you be recommending to Conor Henry for additions to this roster? I guess it's a question both you guys can answer. I know that it's probably a little bit tough without prior notice.
That is it. There's nothing like putting us on the spot there, Chris. What's free agents? I guess you need to. It's really probably going to depend. And we asked a question of Conor last week about what they're going to do from an import point of view. I certainly, from the outside looking in, I hope they go with an American point guard. And then with the roster spots...
Well, just on that, Jerome Randall technically is still under contract. Does that contract have to be torn up from both parties, given not only did it not work with him last year, but he's now also got his ACL injury?
Yeah, it's funny. A few weeks ago they were talking about bringing him back and giving him a job in the office, or like he was definitely going to come back. Obviously, you wouldn't think he'll be ready for the start of the season. Purely from my point of view, I think we've been down this road. We probably need to head in a different direction. But once again, if you don't know what the contract consists of, but yeah, look, I think it's probably, especially with the way things finished up last year, I think there needs to be significant change, and when you've already got, a lot of people were already locked in, now you talk about, DJ, Obi Shea, Daniel Dillon, Brendan Teese, Josh Giddey, etc. You don't have a lot of room to move, so I'd like to see, different imports come into this team. So I guess when you talk about Aussie free agents, it's a little bit difficult to answer because you really what is the need for? You'd love to get a big guy with some defensive grit to be that sort of foil for DJ in that front line. They don't grow on trees. We'd love you to send Nick Kay over our way. That would be we could certainly find. He'd look good in blue, I reckon. But obviously that those sort of people aren't going to happen. But, you got these guys coming back from Europe, potentially the Brock Modems of this world, some of these sort of guys. Once again, you'd imagine everyone's going to be in the market for those sort of players.
Is it going to be a season where it's going to be difficult to attract people like a Brock Modem or even an Angus Brandt to come back to the NBL given the financial situation? I guess you see these guys leaving because of the cut in money. Is it going to be tough to attract some of those bigger names? And maybe you're going to have to either go for budget imports for 12 months. Do you see that being the case?
Yeah, I do. Well, that's why the guys are leaving here. They're clearly getting some pretty decent offers from Europe. And initially I didn't see how that was going to work, but obviously they've got big TV deals over there that they're able to sustain their league without having crowds attend, etc. because of that, whereas here we just can't sustain it without having crowds. So they probably had to take a 30-40% cut if they're to stay, whereas they could probably go over there and make more money. So, yeah, I can't see any of those guys coming back like your Brokoff or your Moten. But, yeah, I think that as well with the imports, we might be looking at some lower class budget imports just for this 12 month, or trying to sign guys on back-ended contracts where they've got a soft start and finish strong.
Now, Jeff had a second question for you, Scott.
I'm not sure I answered the first one, to be honest. But
no, but we don't have a free agency list in front of us until July 1 either, so it's a little bit tricky. So the free agency period has been pushed back. Would Conor Henry be lucky enough to be able to entice you to be his assistant coach?
I think those days are past, mate. It's been over 10 years since I've been involved in coaching. I've got my own business now, and I'm not sure I would want to go back down that road. Look, there's always a love for the game, and you certainly look at it once you've been involved in coaching, you certainly look at it, through those eyes. Look, I think the situation would have to be, would have to work out well for both parties, but certainly nothing that it's on my radar at the moment, that's for sure.
I imagine 5 years ago it was a firm no. Are you starting to get the itch to get back involved again?
Look, I think there's always a little bit of an itch there, and especially with the way that it, finished, which obviously wasn't great. I don't know. I wouldn't say I've got an itch to scratch. I love the game. I love the 36ers. It was 20 years of my life in one form or another. But like I said, I don't think that the club's probably looking at that in any sense, and neither am I.
What are your thoughts on Ninny the coach, Brett?
As he said, I think he's kind of moved on a little bit from it and trying to build his own business. And it brings, especially with Scott now, with a young family as well, there's a lot of extra considerations, I guess, that he would have to put into place. Of assistant coaches don't really stop. They come home, they continue to watch video and tape, and it's a very much a full-time 18 hours a day job, pretty much. So, which is hard with a young family, and so it would make it a very hard decision. But he's clearly got the knowledge. He's got a good South Australian background, and I think that's important as well. And as a quality coach, and would be able to provide Connor with some great insights, etc. But you really have to be wanting to do it for probably the amount of pay that you'd be getting as compared to the hours that they'd want out of you.
Yeah, for sure. Now, one more for you, Scott, and then we will move on. Chad Ryan has got in touch. I don't know if that name rings a bell to you at all, but he's got in touch with us on Twitter. Hey, Scott, just came across this Twitter account. My first ever job was sweeping the floors at your card shop on Jetty Road when I was maybe 11 years old. Thanks for that. I think you paid me in packs of Fleer and Upper Deck cards. Does that ring a bell?
Mate, Rob Rose was my business partner at that time. He would have been lucky to get that. Rob is one of the world's true great tight asses. So I do remember that. That was a few years ago now. But yeah, that was a short-lived experiment. But Rob had always been involved in trading cards, collecting them as a kid, and I got into it pretty heavily myself, but unfortunately 12 months after we opened, Rob ended up playing overseas in Jerusalem, I think it was, and then made his way to Canberra. It was when Mike Dunlap had his great purge of the team, and I ended up in Newcastle, and we tried to keep the business running, but it just didn't work with both of us being interstate. But it was good fun time.
Childhood later, though, that does surprise us, does it?
Paul, 11-year-old. Okay, now let's get on to what we're here for this week, guys. And I mean, when you're talking about putting together all-time Adelaide 36ers teams, it's hard to imagine two better people to be sitting down talking to. Obviously, Brett, you're probably the greatest player the club's ever had. You don't need to say that; I can say it for you. And Scott, you've had a hell of a legacy yourself as a player, as a coach, as an assistant coach, and as we talk about every week, you're the only man that's been involved in all 4 championships that the 36ers have won. So between the two of you, you've pretty much seen every player that we're going to talk about that comes into consideration, either as a teammate, as a coach, or now, I guess, over the last decade, just watching on. So it's going to be a fascinating discussion. It's hard to know where to start, but what I'll start with, the Adelaide Advertiser put together their own team, which was voted on by the public 5 years ago. Let me run through their starting 5. Darnell Mee, Brett Maher, Rob Rose, Mark Davis, and Mark Bradkey. I can't imagine between the three of us our teams will look anything like that. Is that fair to say?
My team. Well, there's a couple of familiar names there that are in my team, but there's certainly a couple that aren't. Interesting, Mark Bradkey, best years weren't with the 36ers. They came later with the Melbourne Tigers, and I think it's the best centre that's ever played in the NBL. But he was a young kid when he played here, and probably 5 years I think he played, and really only his last year or two, were at a very good level. So I think that's I probably just told you that I haven't had him in my first team, I suppose, but. And Rob's an interesting one as well. Rob only played 2 years with the 36ers. Clearly an all-time NBL great. I was thinking about him yesterday. We've all been watching The Last Dance with Michael Jordan, and seeing how ruthless a competitor he was. And to me, Rob Rose was the NBL equivalent of that. He was the most competitive player that I've ever played with, and would not take. I've been on the end of a couple of bakings from him. At various times, if he didn't think you were giving it all you could, and was just a ruthless competitor, and had 2 outstanding years here, but they were only 2 years.
Yeah. Now, question for both of you: when we're looking at an all-time team like this, do you look at individual brilliance? Do you look at how long they played for? Do you put a minimum sort of games on it? Is it 100 games? Is it 200 games? Do you look at the successful teams they were part of? Do championships come into it? Do club MVP awards come into it? Do league MVP awards come into it? What sort of things do you, when you're choosing between, I guess, 2 players, what do you weigh up the most?
Well, I think to preface this, it's a very dangerous thing to be putting lists like this together, because we know all the players. We're gonna certainly piss a couple of people off, and in all honesty, it's so close between certain players, but it's also really hard if picking players from different eras to compare, as everyone keeps saying. So it's a really hard process to go through, and you really, for me, I set my own little criteria for it. That's why some people I haven't got in the teams, but I can kind of explain that hopefully as we go along. But it is, it's a very difficult process, and I think we'll see that we'll all have different lists, so everyone thinks about it a little bit differently.
Yeah, it's tough because you look at it, the 1986 team, I think, it's probably still today considered the greatest team in NBL history. But then you look at the team from the late 90s to the early 2000s, you had such a great run of success. And I guess you look at the last decade, there hasn't been team success, but you've had some really great players like Daniel Johnson, Adam Ballinger, and I guess even given he's won a league MVP award, Jerome Randall. I mean, it's like you said, it's tricky to stack up what performances mean the more, given that it's such a different environment that everybody played in.
Yeah, it certainly is, and I guess that's what makes this fun. Because it's I think all the things you mentioned come into play: team success, individual success, longevity, club MVPs, and so on. I guess when it comes down to selecting someone ahead of the other, it's how much weight you put in all those things combined, I suppose, and that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah. Now, what we might try and do is break it down position by position. So let's start with the point guard, if you're both happy with that. And to me, the contenders, if I forget anybody, please let me know. Darnell Mee, an absolute defensive legend of the league. 131 games in Adelaide, 2 championships, 3 times NBL Best Defensive Player while he was with the 36ers, was named to an all-first NBL team, and a 2-time club MVP. Then you got Al Green, 164 games with Adelaide, won a championship, named to an all-NBL first team. We've even got the legendary coach Phil Smythe, who finished his career as a player with the 36ers as well. Jerome Randall, who I mentioned before, 85 games, has won a league MVP, 2-time club MVP, and a 2-time all-first NBL team. And Jason Williams is another one. You guys know better than I do if he was a genuine point guard or a bit of a combo guard, but 166 games, 3 championships, I guess that deserves recognition as well. Have I missed anybody?
Oh, the only other person I would suggest that is Butch Hayes.
Sure.
Once again, longevity wasn't there. Butch only had the 2 years here, but two excellent years, and went on to be a great in the NBL over the rest of his career as well. I think he's probably the only other name when you sort of start talking these sort of lists that you can consider.
Yeah, I agree. I think we'll probably all have the same ones. It's switch order in this position that we put them. And I know for me, I've flipped the 2 back and forth in my mind, and there's some really strong arguments for both of these.
Well, why don't you go ahead, Brett? As we're in your house, why don't you go ahead and give us your starting point guard and your backup point guard, all-time 36ers history.
All right, well, I chose Al Green as my starting point guard and Darnell Mee as my backup point guard, and that, to me, was really hard because I think Darnell Mee was probably the best and most favourite player that I ever played with. But I also weighed up that and for a lot of this stuff, we take the West Adelaide stuff into consideration as well, as they kind of amalgamated with the 36ers.
Sure.
So he won, in that case, it was 2 championships. He won a league MVP scoring title. He had over 70 points in a game and was one of the all-time greats. He's got a singlet hanging from the stadium. So I decided to squeeze him in front of Darnell, but in reality, that is a flip of a coin for me. Darnell, as I said, was if you wanted someone to get you to win, he would do whatever it took, whether it's defensive, offensive, or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's why I've chosen those two. It was a real hard one to pick one in front of the other.
This was Chris, for me, this was my most difficult pick.
Yeah.
I've gone the opposite of Brett. I've gone Darnell Me as my starter with Al Green as the backup. But I found this really difficult. I think I went for Darnell in the end. Is he's one of only 2 players, and the other being Damien Martin, that could score 2 or 4 points in a game and totally dominate a game because of what he could do defensively. And our 98, our first championship, the first year, the first quarter of that game against the Magic in Melbourne, he terrorised them. He blocked 4 or 5 shots. I think they went 3 of 23 in the first quarter and absolutely set the tone for that, what ended up being a 90-62 blowout. And that, every one of them was shooting the ball was looking to see where he was. He was that good defensively at length. But he obviously we had a lot of success there. Al Green for me is pound for pound the best athlete that I've seen in my time in basketball. You're talking about a guy who scored 71 points in a game, a ferocious competitor, championship winner, MVP. Then went and won two Bay Sheffield sprint, in special running. Once again, this was I'd be happy either way we went, I went Darnell with Al in my second team.
Now, both of you in practice and also in games when I guess when you were playing elsewhere, Scott, and also when Darnell was playing elsewhere, you would have been guarded by him. What was it like to have him guarding you either in practice or in a game?
Darnell was an interesting one because you never really beat him. So if you penetrated and got past him, his length, he could still come over your entire body and block your shot from behind. So he was just so long and quick and timing. Was Al had the physicality and would just beat the shit out of you.
Yeah.
Once he hunkered down and got in his mind he was going to stop you, there wasn't a lot you could do either. But that was the thing that always, at times I'd be able to get past Darnell, but he was never out of the, he was never out of the play. He always found a way to stay in there and get a hand and affect your shot in one way or another. And two very, very special players.
You're one of the great scorers and shooters in league history, Brett. What was it like trying to score against Darnell?
Well, I think that's what helped me because I matched up on him a lot at training.
Yep.
So for me, it was finding ways to be able to score. And when you're able to do it through a training on a regular basis, day to day, it's pretty easy when you come up against far less defenders on a weekly basis. So it really helped, I think, being able to develop different ways to score against such a good defender. I never really got to play against Al too much. He was right towards the end of his career as I was coming through, but Darnell I played a lot against on a daily basis, and you always had your work cut out for you. And for me, if it wasn't Damien Martin, he's the best defender I've seen.
Sure. For those of us that didn't see Al Green play, can you sort of sum up a little bit just how dynamic of a scorer and a player he was?
He was unbelievable in the open court. He just, he was strong as an ox. He was one of those great early athletes. He was head high to the rim. Al's smaller than both Brett and me. Al's only about 6'1", but athletically he could do whatever he wanted to.
We all played above the ring, didn't we?
Of course. But he was so strong. If he had a smaller guy on him, you just take him into the block, and he was very, very effective in the block. And I think, as his game progressed, his perimeter shot became very reliable as well. And, he was he was ferocious. He was one of the great talkers of all time as well. And some of the battles that he had with guys like, Cal Bruton is the one that really springs to mind back in the day. Were just sights to behold. And he was amazing.
It was exciting to watch. There's not many players that you say you just pay to go watch them play, but he certainly falls into that category. The style, he was exciting, athletic, and certainly you'd pay money just to go watch our play, especially in his heyday. It's very good. And he's one like Jordan who used to trash talk just to get you to fight back, and then as soon as you did, that would elevate his game to the next level. And so everyone tried to bite their lip and not talk back to him because you just knew he was a sleeping giant and just waiting for you to say something, so he'd just elevate.
Now, for what it's worth, I've gone Darnell Mee as my starting point guard and Al Green as my backup, but it's difficult for me because I didn't see a lot of Al Green play and I did see a lot of Darnell, so I guess that's probably why I've gone that way. In that team in the advertiser, very close. The voting there, Darnell got 42.8% and Al got 37.6%. So that shows that really there's nothing between the two of them. And if you've got a team that has those two as your point guards, you've got a pretty good starting point. So I think it's a great way to start this team, and it's a great discussion point. It'll be fascinating to see what our listeners think about who they would have had as their number one and number two, or even I guess if they think that somebody else deserved to be above them, which is pretty hard to imagine. But someone like Jason Williams, can you tell me a bit about him?
Oh, Jason! Jason was a hard worker. He came in. He made the most of his ability. I coached him at a local level with the Sturt Basketball Club, and the first thing I did when I coached him there was to move him from the shooting guard to the point guard because I thought he was more suited to that, and that's where he played minutes in the NBL as well. But He had good size, 6'5". He was a really important cog of our last championship in 2002. Not a superstar by any stretch of the imagination, but he got 4, 5, 6 years out of the NBL just by playing his role, defending, and just doing whatever was required of him.
Now the shooting guard. Pretty obvious, I think, who the starter is. Brett Maher speaks for yourself, your record. 525 games, obviously an Adelaide record, 3 championships, 2 times grand final MVP, 3 times All-NBL first team, 6-time club MVP, Olympian. We can go down the list and we can probably be here all day talking about your accolades, but that's what you've got your own podcast for.
You should see the smile on his face here, Chris. He can't wait to name himself as the starting shooting guard.
It's always tough to talk about yourself or put yourself in a discussion like this, Brett, but...
Have you met Brett? He's lovely.
But did you have to think about it? How easy was it to name yourself?
Oh, look, I didn't know criteria whether it was even acceptable to put yourself in the team. So I have got some definite backups or people that would be more than adequate to slip into that position. And I guess, my other player I've picked is Daryl Pearce. He's one of the guys that I grew up watching and kind of modelled my game on a little bit. I love the way he had an effortless shooting style, was one of the best shooters ever in the NBL. And, I just love watching him play. So I had him kind of in there as well. And I guess an honourable mention is Willie Farley, who I have a great relationship with. We won the championship in 2002 and was one of those other guys that you would pay to watch. He was exciting, athletic. I had Daryl in there. His singlet's also hanging from the rafters. He's earned that. And was one of the great 36ers.
Yeah, look, Chris, I've gone the same way. No great surprise. I've put Brett, along with Mark Davis, the 2 greats in our club's history. Daryl Pearce, I've certainly got him as backup, but Daryl was an incredible player and always elevated his games in big games, Olympian, and one of the best shooters I've ever had the pleasure of seeing. When I first started sort of getting opportunities on the court, I was backing up Daryl, and he used to get so shirty when you subbed on for him. He just didn't like being off the court. He was a tremendous competitor and a winner. Like at all levels, and he always played well. As I said, in big games. I'm the same with Brett. Willie Farley gets an honourable mention, but he's not in the rare air that both Brett and Daryl Pearce are.
Now, Brett, Scott played 233 games for the Sixers, won 2 championships. Did he come into your calculations at all?
Oh, look, he's definitely there. Like in this position, a lot of players that play in the 2 can play in the 3 or even swing into the 1. So you can manipulate guys around. And, there's a few that are probably right there with Scott, Willie, and there's another one but I'm going to probably slot him in my 3 spot. But, we're lucky in those kind of positions. We have a lot of depth. And, as you said, like, Scotty's right up there. But I put Daryl in front because he
was better.
Different style of player. But, I think Daryl certainly has earned his spot there for sure.
Now, I've taken a little bit of poetic license. I've gone Willie Farley in my 2 spot, but only because I then pushed Daryl Pearce into the 3 spot. You know better than I do, could Willie and Daryl both play the 2 and 3 spot, or would have that worked?
Oh, I think so. Like 2s and 3s, and a lot of the teams that I've played in were interchangeable positions. So I think so. And this isn't the biggest league in the world. You can play a little bit of small ball. Willie was 6'4", wasn't like he was, and Daryl was probably 6'2", 6'3". So look, and you got guys that different style of players that would complement each other really well. I mean, one that can shoot the lights out, the other that was just an incredible athlete. So I think, mate, it's our podcast. We can do whatever we want as far as poetic license. So I've got no issue with that at all.
One guy we haven't mentioned, Mike Mackay. What can you tell me about him?
Look, Mike, and I think probably Brett and I consider him more of the that bigger guard, and I guess he came into consideration for both of us in the 3 position, small forward. But great player, 6'4", strong as an ox. Having him and Daryl in the same team, just gave nightmares to opposition teams with the way they could shoot the ball from the 3-point line. And another ruthless competitor and a winner. I think it's a real shame that he didn't get to finish his career in Adelaide, which is he would have loved to have done. But it's just certainly still be an all-time great of the club, and will make his way into the club's Hall of Fame sooner rather than later, I'd imagine.
Yeah, 290 games for the club, so that speaks for itself. Won a championship. The small forward position. Now, I found this really tough, and for reasons that we've already talked about earlier on the show, it comes down to, I guess, what your criteria is. So some of the names that I jotted down: Rupert Sapwell, 197 games for Adelaide. Obviously played plenty elsewhere as well, but he played 3 championships. As we just mentioned, Mike Mackay, Mark Nash, 173 games. Won a championship. Martin Catalini, 217 games for Adelaide, 2 championships, 2-time club MVP. Rob Rose, obviously an amazing career elsewhere, but in Adelaide in those 2 years he was incredible. 60 games, named to an All-NBL first team, won a club MVP. Mitch Creek, I think, is a name that goes under the radar, but 197 games, won a club MVP, and he's gone on to play in the NBA and for his country ever since. Yeah, I mean those are the main ones that stood out. Before we talk about who we've picked, did I miss anybody?
No, I think you've got it pretty well covered there, mate. So I think Mitch Creek's an interesting one. You forget how many games he was involved with the club. He was 7 or 8 years, and look, those first couple of years he was young and didn't get a lot of minutes, but to play nearly 200 games and go on to become the player that he has. He didn't make either my team, but I think he's certainly worth an honorary mention when you're talking about this sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree. He was one that I really enjoyed, I guess, watching his journey from the start as a young player to come through. He really matured over that period of time. He grew physically and is one of the great athletes that's played in the NBL. And also just from that maturity point, the way he started and became a leader of the team as well was really good to see how he developed in all of those areas. So he was very, very dominant in his last couple of years here with the 36ers, and of course has gone on to some other good things in basketball as well. But yeah, he's right up there for sure. And as all of those names you mentioned, it's pretty hard, isn't it, to pick two?
Well, why don't you enlighten us with your picks, Brett?
Well, I've gone with the cat man, Martin Catalini, as my starting three. I think he goes down as one of the best three men all time. It's really hard when you look in this position. There's the Sam McKinnons, Glenn Savills as Australians in this, and I think Cat ranks right up there with them, if not better. And as part of our championships, he was certainly one of the main players and was probably unlucky not to have got finals MVP in some of those finals. He played very, very solidly and very well in the big games as well as through the season. He went on. He was very unlucky not to get an NBL MVP. The only reason he didn't was because the year that Sam McKinnon had that year in Brisbane. But he is one of the all-time best 36ers, especially in that three position. And then I had as my backup, I had Mike Mackay in there because his longevity, went to Olympic Games, World Championship, and the years he had here were certainly, I think, his best years, and was also one of the guys that I loved growing up watching play. I think if it was purely based on talent, then Rob Rose I would have put in as my starting three easily, but for me, I put a bit of a criteria on it. Although he had those cracker 2 years here, I kind of put a bit of a limit on. They had to play at least 3 or 4 years for me to put them in the team. So otherwise, he would have got in for sure.
Yeah, very, very close here too, Chris. So I've got Catalini as my starting small forward for the reasons Brett's just said. There was longevity, championship success. Played well in big games. I went slightly opposite of Brett. I did have Robert Rose as my backup small forward, and once again, it was only 2 years, but I think he was that dominant those 2 years, and we had good teams in those years, and we had 4 or 5 guys that were involved in the Australian program. We had Mark Davis still at the top of his game, and there were times that Rob was that good we would just stand there and watch. Probably not for the benefit of the team, but I've got Mike Mackay. If we were doing a third team, he would have been my next pick.
Yeah, I've gone for Cat as well, and he will forever be one of my favourite players. I still get to catch up with him from time to time, and I asked him the question a little while ago. Out of the 3 clubs, where does he feel he played his best basketball, and which does he still feel the best connection to? And he's happy to say that his best years were in Adelaide, as good as his career that he started and finished in Perth was, and his 4 years in Cairns, that was probably when he was at his actual, I guess, physical peak, and he actually got to dominate a team because he was the go-to man. But yeah, he's always going to say that his fondest memories are with Adelaide. What was the difference like playing against a guy like Cat, who was such a competitor, you talked about trash talker with Al Green. He'd love to have a chat out there. He'd love to shoot the ball in your face, let's be honest. What was it like playing against him and then also having him as a teammate and then going back to playing against him again?
Oh, he's a pain in the arse. I was assistant coach to Ian Stucker up in Townsville for a year when Cat was at the height of his powers in Cairns, and I was in charge of doing the scouting for them. And Cat loved to be able to catch and shoot. He loved to dribble once with it, left-handed dribble once, pull up for a jump shot. He was exceptional at it, and I was really strong. Do not let him catch and shoot. Do not let him go one dribble left and pull up for the jump shot. Well, what happens, whether they didn't read the scouting report, he starts one dribble left, jump shot, then ends up having about 38 points on us. And every shot he hit, he runs past the bench and looks at me and goes, "Scotty, didn't you tell him I like to go one dribble?" And he just had the day of his life. And I was getting madder and madder, and probably took it out on Larry Abney, who was guarding him at the time. But he was spirited. He liked to, when I was my brief time coaching the 36ers, we were playing against him, and there was a little incident just before half-time, and Luke Shencher lost his mind. And that's not Luke Shencher. He doesn't do that. And I didn't see what went on. We went in the change room. I gave my halftime spiel. They went back on the court, and I said to the team manager, I said, what happened? And he said, Cat pulled his ponytail. And I caught up with Ken after the game and I said, mate, why would you do that? And he said, I just couldn't help myself, Scotty. I just saw it there and I just had to give it a little tug. So he was a bit of he liked to cause a bit of kerfuffle from time to time.
He wasn't averse to conflict. I remember him chesting up to many of people and sticking his big nose in their face. And we used to call him the chicken man a bit for just pumping his chest out and having a go at people. But he's one of those just lovable blokes that I think anyone that's played with him, they just love hanging out with him. He adds that extra dimension to the change rooms where it can get very monotonous throughout the course of the year, and he was one of those guys that always kind of livened it up.
In the voting in the advertiser for the three-man position, I was amazed. Rob Rose, 62%, and Cat only got 27%. Are you surprised by that?
Oh, not really. I think, once again, those sort of things can be a popularity award. There's no real criteria set. And the people that saw Rob play in a 36er uniform, get to remember this dynamic superstar that was at the absolute top of his game. So, no, that doesn't really surprise me. But I think if you're doing what we do now and you put in some loose criteria, I suppose. But, yeah, look, Rob Rose, Catalini, give me either of those two guys.
Now, with Rob, obviously, I guess it depends on what criteria you set if he's in contention for this sort of a team or not. But overall, where does he rank in terms of all-time NBL players? He's got to be top five at least, doesn't he?
I think so, yeah. Look, it sounds like another list for us, Chris, but look, he's definitely, for me, definitely top five. I think, most people would have him in the top 10 somewhere, but, you also can't overlook, the names from, certainly that, I guess, that golden era, the Mark Davis, James Crawford, Scott Fisher, Bruce Bolden, and Andrew Gaze, Leonard Copeland, and so on and so on and so on. Ricky Gray. So, look, I'd have to have a think about it, but definitely in the top 10 for me.
Okay, and now power forward position. This one's really tricky because I guess it depends on in terms of some of them if they're natural power forwards or not. But I guess the starter speaks for himself. Mark Davis, 481 games, 3 championships, MVP, 4 times All-NBL first team, 4 times club MVP. Before I run down the rest of the list, is it fair to say that he's a lock for the starting spot for all of us?
Yeah, look, for me, he definitely is. He's, I think, the best player that's played for the 36ers. If you look at his career, what he did, he revolutionised the NBL when he came out here and made teams recruit just to stop him. And you saw teams like Perth start to bring in guys like Fisher, etc., just to be able to cope with someone of the calibre of Mark Davis. And he had all of his years here, and I loved watching him coming through, and then getting to play with him was a huge thrill. And, to lead the league in rebounding for, that length of time at 6'6" is incredible. And, so he easily cements himself in my starting 4 spot.
Look, he's the greatest player I think I've ever played with, Chris. And not only is he the best power forward the 36ers have ever had, I think he's the best power forward the NBL's ever seen. However, I've got a bit of poetic license. I don't actually have him as my starting 4, so there you go.
Okay.
So my backup 4, I've gone with KB, with Kevin Brooks. I think he also changed the game out here to come out at 6'8" with those silky handles and that weird-looking shot of his, but just a clutch player. He called himself Mr. Clutch, by the way, but he was exciting to watch, loved playing with him, and he could have played in the 3 or played a lot in the 3 spot as well. One of those guys that, like Catalini, who probably towards the end of his career played a lot of minutes in that 4 spot.
Yeah.
But, KB is probably unlucky not to be in the starting 5, but he's my backup there.
Yeah, his record's great. It was only 98 games, I guess, but 2 championships, grand final MVP, All-NBL first team, club MVP, and now to be an assistant coach as long as he has been, I guess, for longevity in terms of service to the club, he's been a wonderful Adelaide 36ers person?
Oh, absolutely. It's great to great to see a guy of his caliber, one, to come out here and for us to have the privilege to play with him, and then to have the success we had with him, and then all these years later for him to still be here. I hope that he's not lost to the club. I'd love to see him here for a long time to come, but I guess that will play out over the next couple of months anyway. But I've actually got Kevin. I've actually got Kevin Brooks as my starting four.
Okay.
And before everyone that's listening to this thinks I'm crazy, I will be able to explain not having Mark Davis in there shortly. But KB once again was a superstar. And looking at my list, Darnell, Brett, Catalini, KB, that was our lineup in those back-to-back championships. Yeah. So that KB for me is my starting four. Once again, probably a little bit of poetic license to my backup four. I've got Daniel Johnson as my backup four. Yep. He has played four at various times of his career, and I think once again this is where it gets difficult with when we get to the centre position. That's where I had my most difficulty. But then Adam Ballinger, Dusty Reichert, David Stiff. I mean, you're talking about some pretty impressive play. Ballinger was a 4-time club MVP.
I think he won the MVP just about every season he played.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's probably, once again, if we're picking a third team, I'd probably have Ballinger as my third team power forward. But for me, Kevin Brooks, backed up by Daniel Johnson.
Anthony Petrie, Jacob Holmes are two more guys that probably don't quite make the team, but I think just for the competitive warriors that they were, I think they both deserve recognition too.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jacob played, he was here for a lot of years, from once again as a kid to later on in his career. Yes, he went elsewhere as well, but certainly. Once again, if you're making a list like this, he should be on a short list for sure.
Yeah, to me, they were really good role players and came on, played their roles, whereas I think the separating factor for me is that KB and Mark Davis were legitimate superstars, and that's, I guess, the differentiating factor for me.
Yeah, I've gone the same as you, Brett. I've gone Davis with Kevin Brooks as the backup, and in that poll in the advertiser, they went the same as well. Mark Davis got 83% of the vote for the starter, and Kevin Brooks 11% as the backup. So I think it's those two that are the standout. But when you have to try to squeeze into your top five, Daniel Johnson is one that is fascinating. So let's move to the centres. Really, over the course of his 275 game career, given he's played with guys like Matt Hodgson, who is a genuine centre, and different guys like that. Maybe even I'm sure there's been a couple of other big fellas that he's played with too that slipped my mind. But he hasn't always been a centre on the teams that he's played on. He's spent a lot of time at the 4 spot. But in terms of centres, that's where I've counted him in 275 games, 5 times club MVP, 3 times All-NBL first team, and you would think over the next 3 years, those numbers are going to end up at 350 plus games, and who knows what else he'll achieve. The only thing that he doesn't have, which every other player in our teams have, is that he hasn't quite won a championship, but he's been to two grand finals, and hopefully that soon changes. But, the list of centres is impressive. Paul Rees, 262 games with Adelaide, 3 championships. David Stiff, he obviously did amazing things elsewhere, but even in Adelaide, 121 games, 2 championships. Mark Bradkey, who we talked about before, the first 118 games of his NBL career were in Adelaide. Bill Jones, championship winning captain, 113 games. Even, I guess, someone in the mould of a Jacob Holmes or an Anthony Petrie, David Cooper was a great warrior that you guys both know really, really well as well. Almost 200 games that he played for the club as well. We haven't been shy on having some great fight men at the 36ers over the years.
Yeah, I think we've had some really good ones, and for me, I couldn't put Branky in there mainly because, as Scott alluded to before, his best years were after the 36ers. Sure. Although I was there when he played his last game for the 36ers and had, I think, 42 points and 26 rebounds or something ridiculous like that, and was out of this world. But for me, in the 5 spot, I had DJ, 5-time club MVP, and I think he's really grown and found a nice spot there in this 36ers list. And I was really excited when he signed on for another 3 years, and I had him backed up by Bill Jones, who growing up was really fun to watch. One of those real good 2-foot jumpers. Enjoyed dunking the ball, and it was one of my favourites to go along and watch. So those two, And, of course, Reezy had some great success with the championships and was a proven winner, but probably, once again, more of a really good role player than an actual superstar himself that those other two are.
Yeah, and I guess, Chris, this is where I used a little bit of poetic license. Yep. I looked at, I just didn't feel, I guess, with Daniel Johnson, the lack of success, not through no fault of his own. I mean, they've been to 2 grand finals with him in the team. I just struggled to put him in my first team All-Star 5, and that's why I found him a backup spot at the 4, and also with Paul Reese and Brady for the reasons that Brett said. So I put Mark Davis as my starting centre. A little bit controversial, I know, but he did play decent minutes at centre throughout his career, undersized, obviously. The reason for that is I just felt that I needed to have Kevin Brooks in my first team, and obviously Davis was going to make it somewhere along the line. And talking to Brett before we started this, that lineup, me, Mark, Catalini, Brooks, and Davis. Davis was our first sub coming off the bench during those back-to-back championship years, and he would come in for Paul Reese, and we would go with that lineup for a lot of minutes. And I just think I have used a little bit of poetic license, but mainly it's because I didn't think, any of those, I guess, traditional centres, for want of a better word, were, could probably squeeze into that first team. I'm the same as Brett. I've got Bill Jones as my backup centre. Bill was a amazing mentor to me. Like Al Green, Daryl Pearce and Mike Mackay trying to beat me up at training every day. Bill Jones was always the one that would take you aside and really encourage you and teach you a lot of on and off the court. He was just an amazing man. I had a lot of time for him. And he was the unsung hero in those that 86 championship. I mean, he was the guy that, blocked 3 shots in the last 2 minutes. He always was able to elevate his game, in big games. So he always came up with the big play, the big block, the big rebound. And for that reason, I've got him ahead of Reese, Gradke and Stiffo.
Yeah, I mean, you both make great cases. For what it's worth, I've gone DJ as my starter, and I've gone Paul Reese as my backup, mainly because he's one of our favourites here on Sixers Fix, Scott. He's one of our best guests all season. He's not going to come back.
He's certainly entertaining, and once again, one of those guys in the locker room that kept it funny every day, and was just a great guy to play with as well.
David Stiff, obviously, I guess his best years, like some of these other guys, were outside of Adelaide, and he obviously won, I think it's 4 other championships elsewhere as well, or was it 5? He might be the 7-time winner. What was he like to play with? Again, like Kat, having also spent plenty of time playing against him.
I think, I'm not so sure that's correct, Chris. He 2002, that championship year, it was Maher, Farley and Stiff. They were our big 3.
Yeah, sure.
He was vital to those to that championship run, and then after that he just kept winning championships every year, everywhere he went. I love Stiffy. He's a different human being. He
unorthodox, I think, sums him up. Especially he loved doing stuff that was outside the box. So all his step-through moves, pivot moves, he loved doing all of that, and just mentally, he'd say stuff that was out of the box, and I guess that's probably why he went into psychology after basketball.
I tell you what, he used to give Melvin Thomas absolute fits, and there's another all-time player in the league history, but Melvin Thomas did not know how to handle Stiffy with his step-throughs and his, he always thought he was travelling and complaining to the referee. Stiffy always had big games against Melvin because he just bamboozled him. But, a great man, certainly worthy of being in this conversation with what he brought to the 36ers in his time here.
Now, when you have a look at your starting 5, I'll start with yours, Brett. You have a look at Al Green, yourself, Martin Catalini, Mark Davis, and Daniel Johnson. You pretty happy with that?
I am, but when I look at it and then I look at my second team, I'm thinking, look, I think the second team could very easily knock off the first team. And I think it'd be I'd love to see that scrimmage pan out, that's for sure. But I also thought of one more name that I'd forgotten in the 2 spot that probably only just missed us out as well, and that's John Riley. He had 3 or 4 years here, won a championship, and he was huge in some of those games, especially some that spring to mind against Perth. He had some great years here, and he's probably knocking on the door there as well.
Probably the only man that rivaled you as a pure shooter too.
Yeah, I love rebounding for him, and Scott will say the same thing. Like, you rebound for him, you weren't moving 2 feet, and then you'd go and rebound for someone like Dean Brogan and you'd run a marathon. But he was fantastic to rebound for, and, yeah, one of those just pure shooters. It was great to watch.
It's an interesting story, Chris. I went from Adelaide 36ers to the Townsville Crocodiles to the South Dragons in 3 years. So I went from rebounding to Brett Maher to John Riley to Shane Hill. So 3 of the all-time great shooters. And Brett's right, you didn't have to move too much. Ball was coming out of the bottom of the net with everyone. I think as far as just shooting with it, without a defender on you, I know that doesn't happen in games. I think John Riley was the best I've ever seen. He just did not miss. Brett's obviously an extraordinary shooter, will go down as one of the greatest. Hill was, just so ruthless. If he would set himself, if he'd have to make 8 out of 10 from one spot before he'd move on to the next. And if he missed the first 2, he would just found a way. You knew he'd always hit the next 8 in a row. So, I was very privileged to see those 3 guys in 3 successive years. But really, to me, just stands out as it was just such an effortless shot. And, we have been remiss of not mentioning it.
Another one of my favourites, the doctor, Darren Ing. How does he raise a shooter?
Oh, right up there, without question. Possibly the best out of all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, he certainly wasn't the player that the calibre of person people were talking about. But Darren was he had the ability to turn a game in 2 minutes. Like he could come on, hit 3 threes in a row, and blow the game out. And you look at the end of the game, and he had 9 points. That was his whole scoring. Yeah. But he just he was great to watch. Great to watch as a shooter.
And what about your starting 5? When I read it back to you, Scott, Darnell Mee, Brett Maher, Martin Catalini, Kevin Brooks, Mark Davis. Pretty happy with it?
I am happy with that. Yeah, like I said, the centre spot was just one that I just didn't feel. I would have been uncomfortable not having Kevin Brooks in that starting lineup, and I guess with Davis there as an undersized centre, KB was 6'8", 6'9", so it's not like you're playing completely small ball, and you've also got Darnell as a big point guard who could guard bigger, 3 and 4 men as well. So I like the look of it. The Darnell Al Green thing for me still is, I don't know if it sits completely comfortably because Al was such an all-time superstar of the NBL. I just think sometimes we underrate defence, and certainly not. Al Green was a terrific defender as well, but Darnell did things that to me only Damien Martin's ever done, and be able to dominate a game up that end of the court is a very, very rare ability, and I sometimes don't think we give it the credit that it deserves. And but apart from that, I'm pretty happy with it.
Now, is there anyone that both of you are, in terms of somebody who you've left out of your teams, now a bit scared next time you bump into them that they'll be a little bit unhappy?
Oh, Al Green's going to lose his mind. And that's the one that jumps out straight away. I think apart from that, everyone will probably be good. Rob might have a few words to say that he didn't make it.
I think we've tried to cover our ass as much as possible. I was going to say, but Rob, I think we'd all have in our starting 5 pretty much any team, but just due to the criteria that I set with 2 years, I couldn't put him in, but otherwise he'd be in for sure. And I think fairly comfortable with the rest of them.
What's it like for you two guys to sit back and reflect on this much history, knowing how big of a part of your lives the 36ers have been? Is it good fun to do something like this?
Oh, we do it every time we have a glass of red wine, Chris. I think it does. I think the thing for basketball, what it's brought to me, and very fortunate to have a lot of success along the way, but all my closest friends are because of basketball. And I look at someone like Brett, who's 7 years younger than me, and in a normal world, we don't meet and become great mates. So basketball's brought me a lot of friendship, a lot of incredible happy memories, and it is always good, especially the older you get, mate, and a little bit wider around the edges. It's good to be able to look back and talk about all the good times, and it's a lot of fun.
It's a lot more difficult as well than I think you first sit down, you go, this will be easy, but when you start throwing the names around, then as we've found, it's very difficult to put some people in front of others and sacrifice different positions. But it's a fun process, but as long as no one takes it too seriously, then I think it's all good.
I mean, if you have a look at it, we could make a team made up of, let's say, Mark Bradkey, Adam Bellinger, Mitch Creek, let's say Scott Ninnis and Jerome Randall, all guys that haven't made any of our first two teams, and that team would be pretty competitive against the first two that we've come up with. Oh,
mate, I'm looking at my third team now. Jerome Randall, Willie Farley, Mike Mackay, Adam Bellinger, Mark Bradkey.
Yeah, wow.
that's a serious team. And I guess that's one of the good things is we've had so many great players here in this club, and then to be able to have these sort of debates, and we keep bringing up these names, brings back a lot of very, very fond memories and a lot of very close friends.
Both of you have spent, over the last 10 years at different times, time, I guess, estranged from the club for different reasons, but you're both back pretty heavily involved right now, and I think if you have a look at Grant Kelly and Ben Kavanagh, they've made a big effort to include former players like yourselves in the decisions the club's making. Are you feeling pretty buoyant about where the club's heading at the moment? Do you feel like, despite the way last season ended, that things are in a pretty good place?
I think, they're turning it around pretty well. As far as engaging with the past players, Scotty and I have been, I guess, part of a past players committee that consults with the club, and we've been part of that for a while now. And I think it's a really important part for any club to keep that history going and engage with those players. And especially in Adelaide, we have a fan base that dates right back to the Apollo days, and those people like to see those familiar faces around. So it's very important, I think, that they've embraced that and they're trying to do things like they did around the top foyer area of the entertainment centre, plus holding functions, inviting players to it. I think it's really important, and I think they've done a pretty good job with that, and to continue that on and have Scott and I involved with the club potentially in other areas, I think could bode well for the future and moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great thing, and a club with such a rich history, you just can't move forward without getting you guys involved. And I think it's something that hasn't always been done well, but I think it's been done a lot better right now. But yeah, for now, this show is all about our all Adelaide 36ers teams, and I'm looking forward to seeing what sort of feedback we get. And we'll be back again next week, Scott, and we'll have a special guest, I'm sure, and we'll have some reflection on some of the feedback we've got, and it'll be interesting what people have made of what we've come up with.
Oh, looking forward to it, and that's it's so subjective. That's what makes these discussions good fun. And there'll be some people that agree with us, and there'll be some people that don't. And that's all good. I guess once again, I'll be pretty happy with any of these players that we've been mentioning in any team. You're right. It's a rich history and some phenomenal players.
It's been fascinating for me to take this trip down memory lane with both of you. So, Scott Ninnis and Brett Maher, thanks for joining me on Sixers Fix with Scott Ninnis, and now let's just put it out to the public and see what they think.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having us.